Hello, hello. My name is Cheryl Branch, and I am the Executive Director of the Los Angeles Metropolitan Churches. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Los Angeles Cannabis Tech Week, Night 2. On behalf of the Department of Cannabis Regulation and Los Angeles Cannabis Tech Week, thank you for participating. The department's new business licensing and compliance program has officially launched. Tonight is night 2. As part of this program, DCR will add a series of custom created virtual learning modules, digital assets, adult education checklists, and a list of other supports and services to help you with your license and cannabis operations. So please refer to the DCR's website for updates ongoing. Someone dropped that in the chat, please, cannabis.lacity.org. For Cannabis Week this week, we're on night 2, as I said before, and we have some awesome presenters tonight who will provide you some relevant information for integrating technology into your cannabis business. We have one more night tomorrow, and the speakers following me will cover that. So I want to thank you again for joining. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Dilara Uskup, who will introduce the exciting blockchain and crypto technology integration panel. Thank you. Turn it over to you, Dr. D.
Thank you, Ms. Branch. Again, thank you for participating in LA Cannabis Tech Week. As a reminder, the City of Los Angeles does not endorse any private companies or products, and all information shared here is for educational purposes only. Additionally, the webinar is being recorded for educational purposes. Camera and audio functions will not be available to attendees via Zoom webinar. However, all attendees will be able to see, hear, and learn from our panelists this evening. There will be an open chat box where you can comment in the discussion. Feel free to include your email with your comments so we can respond to your question even if we can't address them in this live webinar. We encourage you to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom of the pane of your Zoom screen to ask any questions. Tyler Berlane unfortunately had an urgent family matter and will not be in attendance this evening, but we are excited to be joined by Matt Davidson and Dr. Isaac Balvin. And again, I'm your moderator for this evening, Dr. Dilara Uskup with the Los Angeles Metropolitan Churches. Matt Davidson works for product marketing at Everledger, applying extensive knowledge on blockchain and its applications within the diamond, gemstones, wine, and spirits, apparel, and cannabis industries. Starting during his college career, Matt has independently studied blockchain technology and developed product ideations leveraging blockchain-backed non-fungible tokens or NFTs. He strives to be an evangelist for the technology within his activities, both inside and outside his work with Everledger. Welcome this evening, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Dr. Isaac Balvin started his career by completing a PhD in electrical engineering, where he had a huge amount of success writing articles, winning awards, and publishing patents. However, to his great frustration, the technology he developed was not brought to market. So he started down an entrepreneurial path where he stumbled across blockchain technology. From here, Dr. Balvin went to found Parcel, a revolutionary supply chain technology company that utilizes blockchain and other cutting-edge technologies such as IoT, Internet of Things, AR, VR, AI, and machine learning, and many more. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Dr. Balvin. And I know what you mean with the frustration in the academy, but that is so exciting that you are in this space now. So we are so happy to have you.
Absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you so much, Dr. Dilara.
So next, I would like our tech team to bring up a poll. So we have a poll for all those who are attending. We want to know more about your knowledge on blockchain technology. How knowledgeable are you about crypto and blockchain technology integrations for cannabis cultivation practices and for just cannabis licensing practices writ large? So how much do you know about crypto and blockchain on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being you're just learning, you may not be very knowledgeable, and 10 being very knowledgeable. So we will provide about 30 seconds for you to drop in your answers into the poll. And if you can't see the poll, just drop in the chat on a scale of 1 to 10. How knowledgeable are you about crypto and blockchain integrations for cannabis business practices? All right, do we have a result? All right, so it looks like the folks on our joining us this evening are just learning about cannabis, crypto, and blockchain technology. So that's very exciting. We look forward to learning with you over this next hour and a half. All right, let's get going. So I have a slide deck for Matt, and if our tech team could get that slide deck up, he is going to present a few slides just to give us a little bit of background on what is blockchain.
Yeah, sounds good. And thanks for that litmus test of everyone's knowledge. Honestly, pretty interesting to see there are a couple 10s. I was going to put myself as an 8. So, maybe some of you guys could have replaced me on this panel, but hopefully I can share a little bit of my knowledge, working from an academic standpoint and then in actual industry with blockchain applications, what I've seen and where I think, things might be going, especially in this area of cannabis. So I wanted to kind of establish, this simple question: what is a blockchain, or what is blockchain? It looks like a lot of you are more on the novice side of things. But what I think is important to kind of think about when you think about blockchain is you don't really need to know how it's going to work intensely. You don't need to know how all the protocols are going to work, just like you don't know how the TCP/IP protocol works and established the internet, right? It's the bottom of a very tall tech stack that provides a lot of good things, but it's not very tactile, and it's not very necessary to know a lot of that nuance on the back end. But on this slide, I hope to provide a little bit of quick information as to what is a blockchain. So a blockchain is just a way to share data peer-to-peer through a distributed ledger. And what that means is, if you take what how systems exist today, everything is very centralized. So you access your social media, you're going to hit Twitter servers, and you're going to get into the Twitter, kind of tech stack, and they control it. They can bar people from getting on Twitter. They can, promote people. They can do whatever they want. And especially with your data, they can do whatever they want with your data. But you can, on a distributed application, essentially, it's a group of nodes in which are all that Twitter, but it's not centralized in Silicon Valley. It's decentralized among stakeholders who are dedicated to, providing that kind of platform for the internet. And what a node is essentially a copy of the entire code base for a blockchain, but distributed again across these computers. So I might be able to run a node, and then Dr. Isaac can have, his version of the node, which is essentially that same copy. He can make certain transactions, and we can have consensus as to what exists on the node, so that we don't have this what's called a Byzantine problem, where one hand is not aligned with the other. Over time, you basically have this kind of decentralized truth of information as it exists on the blockchain. From I think I'm just going to go right into the slide and the application for cannabis. Really, what would happen in this industry is every stakeholder would have their industry blockchain. So it could be a public blockchain, it could be a private enterprise blockchain just for cannabis. But the idea is everyone has access to that blockchain and that application. And during the course of a product lifecycle for production, you have these stakeholders, doing different things to the product, attesting, processing, shipping products that started out as this, this thing in the ground at a cultivator. So by basically offering your data and also consuming data from other users on the blockchain, you can start to kind of daisy chain this story of what at Everledger we call provenance, the idea you can track everything back to its origin. So the cultivator, would pass all the data along to a harvester. They would attest, more information about the harvesting. That would go through to, another stakeholder, eventually to a laboratory who would have an independent evaluation on that product. But with IoT, the blockchain, the internet, you can actually have a really good sense of truth of what happens to even a gram of marijuana by the time it reaches the end consumer, assuming everyone is, acting in good faith and diligently providing data to the blockchain. So again, it's just a distributed way of sharing information that kind of transcends this centralized ecosystem that we've been, kind of exposed to for the last, kind of decades of the internet existing. So this is what we call Web 3.0, decentralized web. And I know that was, there's a lot more I can go into about any one of those kinds of strings. I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but that is the general overview of how it works. Cool, I can go on to the next slide, or Dr. Isaac, if you wanna correct anything or add to what I've said, feel free.
Yeah, no, thanks, Matt. Look, I think you've given people a pretty good basic explanation of what that's all about. But I think I'd caution, the people that are listening today to also really focus on the fact that they don't need to know how every bit of this blockchain works, how it's all protected, the underlying game theory principles that keep the whole thing protected, private, public. I think a lot of that, ends up becoming things that, us on the software delivery side are going to kind of worry about for cannabis businesses. And I just think that they need to understand that really with blockchain, it opens up these new possibilities that we didn't have before. Because look, centralized systems have actually done a lot of good. They've done some really, really good things. But, as Matt said, this is now the evolution beyond that. So you can think about that a centralized organizational structure is just a special case of a decentralized one, which is more broad and has more possibilities. So without jumping into too much of the detail, I just wanted to add that onto what you're saying. So.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think we see eye to eye on the whole thing. Especially with people, not necessarily having to worry about all the nuance, because you will go into some rabbit holes and it does get very intense, as I'm sure you are aware. Yeah, so this slide, and I'm again, Dr. Isaac, I've heard that you have the same kind of ideas when it comes to how you integrate, something physical like a product, like a gram or an eighth of cannabis that's in its own container. That is a physical product. And, what I just mentioned were all these digital transactions around data. How do you kind of attest to something that's physical, when that's essentially decoupled from everything happening digitally? I guess the answer is you kind of force that coupling through something called Internet of Things or AIDC, auto ID technology. So I'm sure we are all aware of, QR codes, and those kind of identifiers. RFID is another example of this technology, which allows you to gain insights from something physical by interacting with the software and hardware kind of attached to that product. And what I have right here is actually, this is NFC right here. So this is the tap to scan technology, which I'm sure you're aware of with Apple Pay and whatnot. But this allows for a kind of serialized product to be represented against this NFC. So when I scan it, I would be able to uncover not general information about, one's grow and cultivation strategy, but actually serialized product level data on that eighth of marijuana that I'm, thinking about purchasing in the store. And attestations can kind of, data providing can occur against this IoT as the product moves across the supply chain. So you have this idea that things are automated, even though, you're kind of transcending this digital world. You can get automated data on physical products. So you don't have to think about taking the word for, someone entering data in a, computer. You have these IoT interactions with data and metadata that kind of give you this idea of the truth behind that product. And yeah, so there's a lot, that I think IoT can enable, especially with security. You can ensure that the product wasn't tampered with or substituted, because there's a lot of things like an anti-tamper strip that when it gets broken, it won't be able to kind of return that clean slate of data. It will bring up that anomaly right to you. So I think this is very important for how things are going to go in the future, because everything is going to be tagged. But real quick, what's also important to note is that the cannabis industry is also working with these identifiers within their centralized systems. So the lift and shift to blockchain technically shouldn't be too difficult, since a lot of states require RFID tracking and different levels of IoT enablement.
Well, let me tell you, for all the operators out there working with Metric, I think they would say it's not as simple as it seems, even though a lot of the basic building blocks are actually in place, and a lot of those conceptualizations are already there. So just to kind of, by the way, thanks for putting up that slide. It's like a perfect one. It's like you made it for us. So thank you very much, Matt. But just also wanted to say that one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that, there are different technologies that are applicable in different scenarios. If we've got a packet of papers, there's no point putting a 50-cent tag on it that's going to do all this fancy stuff. We're just wasting a whole bunch of money. So one of the things that is important is that there's a blend between cost, functionality, and security. And that's one of the things that we're always very cognizant of. One other thing that I'd probably just add to what you see there on the slide is you can also extract sensory type information. So that would include things like temperature checks, UV detection, basically anything you'd want to detect. And so even, if you're a cultivator and you want to try to understand why do plants in this part of my greenhouse grow differently to that part, you can actually go ahead and collect the data that's going to actually start to give you answers to some of your questions using some of this technology. And the reason is, when we go about doing it, part of what we do differently, and I'm pretty sure that Matt and the guys at Everledger do the same, is we are item specific. Every single tag out there has its own individualized identity, and whether we represent it as an NFT, whether we just have a token on the blockchain, whether we've got a reference, however it is, the point is that we can trace that individual back through the whole thing. And I think that that's part of the power of what we're able to bring to the industry, which is when you make things specific and accurate, all of a sudden you can actually start to uncover some of the problems that are out there. I think they had they did a check a couple of years ago on the accuracy of labels in the Californian cannabis market, and they found that over 20% of those labels were actually fraudulent. So the problem is that they only find that out after the fact. So some of the things that we're trying to do here is put systems in place. They're going to be able to catch problems before they happen, so that we get them early, we make them specific. And also, more importantly, a lot of people out there, let's say using Metric, will have a number sitting in a database. The trouble is, how do you know that that number is real and actually has a true representation in the physical real world that we all live in? So one of the things we've got to recognize, look, human beings are fantastic, but they make mistakes. And you got to take that into account. So when you're building a system, you've almost got to assume at every point someone could have accidentally put the wrong number, deliberately put the wrong number. So as much as possible, what we've done in our system design is have all of these checks and balances that are constantly verifying. And I think that's one of the things that blockchain helps conceptually put onto the table, because the whole point of the blockchain is you need to cooperate in a network with people that you don't trust. So the whole system is designed to operate without trust. And I think a lot of times people forget that really that's some of the big value that blockchain is going to be able to provide, whether it's in cannabis or other industry, because there is a cost to trust. We just don't think of it that way.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think we definitely should talk more. There's even this, just for, some broad knowledge on the topic, there's a whole consortium, which I'm a part of, that just meets monthly to talk about AIDC, IoT, and cannabis. There's just so much potential. There's so many different kinds of labels and nuance that you can, solve a lot of problems, but we're at the stage where we're trying to really make sure we understand the problems before we offer a solution, because that's one of the things that is, especially with blockchain as well, you don't want to offer a solution without having a problem to deal with. But yeah, so with speaking of problems, I think one issue in cannabis right now is the end consumer as a touch point. They get told all this information when they're trying to choose to buy cannabis at a dispensary that is impossible to validate. And most people, probably take it for face value, but I'm one of those, interested consumers. And I know I'm not the only one who really wants more data on their products, who would spend more money if they had more data on their products. And that is all possible through some, snappy consumer-facing applications. The one on the left is just a prototype of what I worked on. But the idea, again, you scan this QR code, NFC, and you can bring up this vault structure, click into, the cannabis that you want to analyze. And, you can see this journey of provenance from cultivation through to testing and how it essentially got to retail. And I won't show you, the whole thing. There's a lot more that we're thinking about for this story. But I think that's very powerful, because now I can see, how values like percent THC came to be, because I don't want to take that for face value. And I, as a consumer, don't think I have to take it for face value, especially with this new technology emerging on the market called blockchain. So yeah, that's what we're thinking about. That's the B2C side. And then on the flip side, you have a lot of B2B kind of things you do with compliance, and whatnot to get, that data on chain in the first place. So there's value upstream and downstream when it comes to this idea of cannabis on the blockchain.
I want to thank Matt and Dr. Isaac. Wow, we're in the first 15 minutes and I already have 50 questions to ask you just about what you have said. But I do want to remind all of our attendees of our community guidelines and just take a moment to say that we're here to inspire and inform. And we recognize that we are all entering this conversation with diverse backgrounds, experiences, and licensing journeys. And so we do ask to foster a community of mutual respect for one another. And we want to keep our discussion and questions uplifting and motivating. And we really do want to be encouraging. And we understand that this is new technology and you may not be able to integrate it into your business tomorrow, but you may be able to think about how to integrate and how to use some of what has been suggested in this conversation this evening in your business as you move towards sustainability and not only surviving, but thriving. I want to highlight, Dr. Isaac, when you talked about cost, functionality, security, and then the blend and the balance of those three very important words. I just want to carry that with us as we move through this conversation. So before we get into some specifics, and I also do want to note this for our panelists, you are doing such a great job with listing acronyms, but then also saying the definition. But there was one RFID that was on the slide deck, but in case someone didn't catch it, it is radio frequency identification. So I wanted to make sure that those who are maybe watching on a phone or something, if they could not see that terminology, could learn the definition and the meaning. I want to take a step back, and in 2 minutes or less, I want to know, how did you all get to where you all are today, and your work in blockchain technology?
Okay, yeah, I'll go first. So yeah, this really, I mean, I've been exposed to it almost since, its existence. So I'd say in 2013 is when I started getting interested in Bitcoin, and started trading Bitcoin. But before, you think about, my kind of financial standpoint, I have sold everything when it was around $150, not $50,000. So don't think too much about that. But that exposed me to, this idea of peer-to-peer cashless transactions. And I thought that was cool. And I thought it was, it did something for society and for the bankless world. But, I didn't really know what else you could do with it. And I didn't think you could do anything else with it. But during college, I was lucky enough to work with a professor who put me through this independent study called something like Blockchain Revolution of the Internet or something. And I was introduced to this idea of Ethereum, which takes this idea of blockchain that Bitcoin has established, but then puts on this thing, introduces this thing called smart contracts, which are essentially, agreements that you make in code. So you agree to certain things happening when, certain instance might trigger that protocol, and you agree to be part of that protocol. So when those things happen, you agree to that outcome, no matter if it benefits you or doesn't. And those smart contracts, kind of when you think about them as a stack, you could create something called a distributed application, which is an application that runs on the blockchain. Once I figured that out, my brain went wild. I was like, you can, put concert tickets on the blockchain to make sure that people don't double spend their concert tickets. And of course, I was 20-something-year-old. I was thinking of, I want to see the whole story end to end of my cannabis, because I've never been able to see that. And I know this thing is very well situated to work with established supply chains that, take a good, but then refine it into something, that again, the consumer, takes, because they're not buying the marijuana plants, a piece of the flower, but even more so, they're buying, processed goods, which are even less transparent and more opaque. So I just got really excited, and I just had to get a job in blockchain. I had network and find my way. So that's when I discovered Everledger, and since then, I've learned about how the diamond, gemstone, apparel, electric vehicle battery supply chains are all starting to work with blockchain, and there's just no reason cannabis needs to be outside that bubble.
Awesome. And Dilara, you're killing me. 2 minutes. I don't know how I'm going to pack it all in there, but I'll do my best. So I, like a lot of people back in 2017, I had a friend who was making a lot of money on Bitcoin. And every week I'd see him and he'd be like telling me, you've got to invest in it. You've got to invest in it. You've got to invest in it. Now, I need to let everyone know I am a shocking gambler. And I was certain that were I to invest any money into this magical Bitcoin thing, I would immediately lose all of my money. But when my friend was telling me about all of this stuff, I thought it was quite interesting. And so I looked at it from a, mathematical perspective, started analyzing the underlying, game theory and cryptographic analysis that makes the whole thing work. And to be honest, I fell in love with it. Immediately, it was apparent how so much waste and inefficiency, and to be quite frank, absolute BS was going to be removed from our society because of the new possibilities that this technology put onto the table. Now, we're still a bit of a ways from there, but fundamentally, that's sort of why I got into the blockchain side of it. And then I also was lucky enough around the same time, July 2017, I went to a meetup here in Australia, in Melbourne, where for the first time, people presented facts, data, science about how and why cannabis is effective as a medicine. Now, a lot of people are in this industry for all sorts of different reasons. I've got to say that, to be quite frank, the reason that I do this and that I get up really early and stay up really late is because I saw a kid who basically would have been dead if not for the miracle of medicinal cannabis. I saw that person stand up from their wheelchair, which they hadn't been able to do for over 2 years. It was one of those things that, you know, it just touched my heart. I can't let go of it. And the fact that the government would make his parents criminals to get him the medicine he needs to live was not something that I could live with. Now, I don't have bags of gold I can throw at a problem to fix it, but I am good with technology. So that's how this whole thing basically got up off the ground.
Thank you both for sharing your stories. I want to turn, because both of you mentioned Bitcoin, and Matt, you know, you talked, and you and Dr. Isaac both talked about blockchain technology, but can you inform us what's the difference between blockchain technology and cryptocurrency or crypto assets?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I like to think of it as crypto assets because I think cryptocurrency is a little bit of a misnomer. Because for a currency to really work, it can't go from, you know, $100 to $50,000 in a span of 5 years. That doesn't make any sense. That's a security. But what Bitcoin is, you know, is a cryptographically secured asset on the blockchain. So basically using the protocol of Bitcoin, you establish rules and a shared understanding of what it means to own one Bitcoin and what it means to transfer Bitcoins and how many Bitcoins are produced within a certain amount of time, called a block, which is, you know, a 10-minute interval. And then you add on a market cap and you add on, you know, this idea of actual scarcity that exists digitally. And now you can start to attribute a value to it. Because once you have this understanding of this trustless system, you know that there's not going to be like an Elon Musk who's just going to create 50,000 Bitcoins tomorrow. You have the security of the knowledge of the supply, and therefore, you know, you can gauge the price based off demand and use it for commerce and whatnot. So yeah, cryptocurrencies, crypto assets, I think I'd rather segment them kind of on that fungible basis, like Bitcoin, where one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, versus a non-fungible basis, which is a lot of what we're talking about. And it's a lot of what is talked about when you hear about NFTs. They stand for non-fungible tokens, which means that there's only one of this token that exists. There might be something that's very similar, but there's going to be some aspect of that data which is going to make it unique. So when we talk about crypto assets as NFTs, you can secure, you know, a end product of cannabis technically as that non-fungible crypto asset, and even pay for it with a more fungible cryptocurrency.
Dr. Isaac, do you want to add on?
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, that explanation was pretty good, but, you know, we all can't help ourselves. We get too technical sometimes. So I'd probably just like break it down a little bit and say cryptocurrency is to blockchain what joints are to cannabis. It is just one type of blockchain technology, which happens to be the most popular one. And it's got to do with the amount of money in our pockets. Everyone is highly interested in it. Blockchain is the technology underneath that actually makes all the magic happen. Cryptocurrency is just one thing we use it for. So, you know, Matt and I working in using blockchain to track items through a supply chain. It is another use case, sort of similar to an edible or something like it. And that's sort of why, you know, the nitty gritty a lot of the time with these things isn't overly important there. And so you just want to try and like keep it simple. Blockchain is fantastic, but one thing people should keep in mind is it doesn't work everywhere all the time for all the things. People should really think of blockchain as a tool, you know, like a hammer. And I'm going to use my hammer when I need to put a nail in a piece of wood. I'm not going to use my hammer when I want to get money out of an ATM. So it's, you know, got to be used appropriately, and then you can get the best out of it.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
So what is, yeah.
I was just going to say that
yes.
For some reason, I just needed to kind of express another tool analogy. But someone in another kind of group mentioned this. They say people don't buy drills, they buy holes, right? So really, cryptocurrency is the drill, right? It's a means to an end. It's a means to do a peer-to-peer transaction. But what you really want is the benefit of that transaction. So that's kind of how I see it.
Thank you. Thank you. So, what is the role of blockchain technology and crypto assets in helping small businesses and social equity applicants collect, analyze, and use data from consumers?
I'm gonna defer now because I don't want to go first anymore.
Not a worry. Anytime you want to defer, I just often have to stop myself talking too much. It's just got to know yourself. So look, I would actually say that is an open question that we don't have a clear answer to. There's a lot of different models that can come into play here. You could talk about a rewards program. You can talk about a payment platform. You can even talk about a feedback platform. I think rather I would reframe the question and I'd say, how can blockchain help customers and businesses work together with a higher level of trust? I think that there's all sorts of, really interesting ways that can happen. And it's something that's sorely needed in the cannabis industry. So look, cannabis is a little bit unique because unlike most other industries, there aren't a whole bunch of guys, out the back trying to sell illegal tomatoes, right? Like they don't have to deal with that problem so much. Whereas in cannabis, there is a large parallel black market that we all need to be cognizant of. Now, in the early days of legalization, they thought about that a lot. How are we going to stop people buying illegal cannabis and buy legal cannabis? Now, one of the most important things you actually have to do to be able to do this is to be able to differentiate between legal and illegal cannabis. And the problem is, on the plant itself, it's impossible. You can't do it. It is exactly the same thing. So that's why we need these technology systems to come in to give tools for end users, businesses, auditors, police officers to be able to make that differentiation in a way that they can trust. Otherwise, you guys would have seen how many times people had, huge amounts of crop pulled off, by law enforcement officers that simply don't have a mechanism to be able to ascertain if this activity is legal or not. And what people need to understand, sure, it's a sad story and it's no good and we don't want that to happen, but that makes your cannabis more expensive. So if you're a business, you can just think about how blockchain can help create a stronger bond between you and your customers.
Thank you. And as we continue the conversation, we do give thought and pause to our language and our use of language as we recognize terminologies such as black market or racialized. And as we think about the war on drugs, we try to shift our language to use language such as unlicensed industry versus licensed market, et cetera. Matt, did you want to add on to this question?
Yeah, like the only thing I kind of agree with all that sentiment. I think it's more of this idea of collaboration between industry and consumers, I think will become more obvious as blockchain gets developed. Honestly, I thought the question was a little bit weird because I don't really like this idea of consumers being kind of this silo for data that can help my business do whatever. Because consumers are, human beings, they're individuals, they have thoughts and feelings, they're not just data points. But to get down to the brass tacks, you can scrape a lot of data from consumers. And the one thing that I thought would be important to note is with IoT stacked on blockchain, you can now have more understanding of usage of the products, which you might not be able to access before. So every time, you can get an insight every time someone scans your product, and you can arrange those geographically to understand where people are scanning your products and essentially where they're getting used and where people are looking to hit the blockchain. And it kind of gives you this idea of data post-sale as consumers continually kind of integrate with or interact with your distributed applications and your IoT technology attached to their cannabis products.
So just to bring out an audience question, we have a question from Jack, and he says, Dr. Balvin, why can't we just use Metric to track our cannabis? So what is blockchain doing that Metric and using the Metric system how is blockchain that technology adding to Metric to track cannabis from seed to sale?
So if, by the way, if we're talking about metric versus imperial units, I'm going to go metric system all the way. But if we're talking about the cannabis compliance software in the United States, one of the issues that a lot of businesses operating with have is they have to report a lot of data to metric for the purposes of compliance. Okay, no problem. The problem is that they then don't really have access to that data to be able to use inside their business to actually make it better. So, and this is one of those things where it's really quite interesting because as a cannabis business, I don't want to take each and everything that you do and put it on a blockchain. That's your private commercial data. Like, it is not okay that we're going to take that and expose it and share it with, the rest of the world. And the same goes for private personal data about end users or staff members or any of the people involved in there. But one of the things that blockchain technology does give us the ability to do is have this really nice blend between security, privacy, and transparency. So, for example, if consumers wanted to know that a particular retail store, say, had done a full count of all their inventory and everything checked out and was okay, and that had been repeated, 5 times back every 2 weeks, that level of information could be exposed without it necessarily being a problem. But it's something where, we've spent a lot of time thinking about that differentiation between what is okay for people who are in a business, what about the next business in the supply chain, what about just a stranger off the street that happened to pick it up and scan it. The data rights and permissions and things like that are extraordinarily important to think about, because once it's out, it's out. But the good thing is, without this sort of a technology, we're never going to have any, for example, large scale machine learning, artificial intelligence applications in cannabis, because everyone just keeps their own data. They don't share it with anyone. They're worried about losing it. They're nervous about it. So this is a way to be able to share and collaborate without giving up ownership and control of your own data.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. I think what's interesting with Metric is, they'll take any data you'll give them. They'll take all of it, but you can't get any data from them. You can't take any insights, even if you provided them to Metric, in some respect. And what I think that boils down to is essentially inefficiencies where this data exists, but it's not being shared. And there's a lot of examples where you can share data and it's not, something that is going to impact your business from a competitive standpoint. It's not like you're leaking IP. There's some very basic data points that are just siloed that could immensely help efficiencies for another stakeholder. But again, through this kind of, putting up walls, you don't get that full benefit of the data on the supply chain. So that's why I always refer to these things as industry blockchains, where you're essentially building something that enables efficiencies for all with mutual value prop. And it's not something that's net zero in terms of, zero sum in terms of value. You actually can create value and synergy with a blockchain. And I hope, Metric sees that in the near future.
Matt, can you give us an example of what information could be shared on the blockchain that, if we tear down these silos, it would be helpful to everyone that is participating in the network?
Yeah, I think like some kind of process elements of, harvest dates, kind of that trickling down into someone who's going to take that now harvested flower and they're going to process it further. They could essentially, establish a chain of custody between their 1 ounce nug run BHO and the 10 pounds of flour that it took to produce that. I don't know the ratios exactly, but without having that data, I find it very difficult to establish that chain of custody back to the farm, back to the earth, where again, I believe this idea of provenance can really exist. You can actually get the understanding of where things were grown, even if you're eating a cookie or you're taking a dab or you're hitting a pen, that had originated in some facility within the state that you're consuming that product. But without kind of that data sharing, I think it's near impossible to really know that and offer it to the end consumer.
Got it. Another question in from the audience, and I do want to continue to encourage our audience members to keep dropping questions in the chat and the Q&A function. Is there resistance from growers, distributors, or end customers with tracking information on a public blockchain, which can expose data, possibly private in nature, on a public chain?
So if you don't mind, I'll just jump in quickly, but I'd say that a lot of the conversations that we actually have with people operating in the industry, blockchain isn't at the forefront of the conversation. And I think a lot of the times that's one of the many mistakes that people who work with this technology make, where they think that everything is about the fact that it's on blockchain. Whereas if you go and talk to people working in the industry in California, you'll find out that they got other problems that are of much bigger importance than, sharing data for grandiose AI applications and things of the like. So what we found really interesting, for example, is that one of the things that our customers have really taken to more than anything is just the efficiency with which they can count their inventory and keep that inventory really, really accurate. So it's, sometimes we're helping people go from, an Excel spreadsheet. Sometimes we're helping people, working with other software solutions that are giving negative inventories or, all sorts of silly things. But just, keeping inventory accurate, being able to do it quickly, being able to share it efficiently, like that tends to be the first conversation. All of those, future functionalities that are like, well, that's all well and good and people will listen to you, but it's not the thing that they really want to hear from you right off the bat.
But going to this question of security, and maybe you can touch on this a little bit, Matt, because we do hear, there was just a hack a week or two ago, and it was a crypto asset hack, but still, when we talk about blockchain, we think that it's so secure, within this block, and that it's immutable, and it has all these other characteristics. But then we see these examples in the news, like so and so got hacked, and this firm got hacked, and this crypto asset got hacked, and this amount was stolen. So as social equity applicants and our other attendees are looking to get into these technologies, should this be something that kind of concerns them and gives them reason for pause?
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I haven't maybe been up on the news in the most recent ones, but I definitely have seen a bunch in the news. And what I take away from it is a lot of it is less of the blockchain being hacked and a specific endpoint being hacked, right? So the blockchain is a system, like I talked about with nodes, blah, 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 blah. It's a system of computers. A lot of it works off a consensus protocol, which requires at least the majority of the network to align with what's on the blockchain. So you would need to launch a 51% attack to basically take over a lot of blockchains, which means you need to hack, let's say an ecosystem has 100,000 computers, you would need to hack a little over 50,000 of those individual nodes or computers to actually change and fork the results of that blockchain. But endpoint hacking is a little bit different. That's essentially, I have an API that accesses an application on the blockchain. Someone hacks that API and is able to withdraw funds from my one wallet as a protocol, or they're able to hack the protocols. But I think, attacking the whole industry blockchain, let's say if that happens, if cannabis does decide on an industry blockchain, they would have to hack every single kind of computer within that. And as long as the endpoints are secured and, don't have, that security weakness, which is often found with these hacks, you can secure it, pretty well. And, if you're comparing it to centralized systems, I mean, forget it. If you need to hack, hacking anything, hacking one database is always going to be easier than hacking one blockchain, at least from what I've learned about it.
Got it. And I do want to just bring up a comment from the audience. And Douglas says, my concern is adding more work for employees. Cannabis is already tested and tracked more than alcohol. We want to compete with the illegal market, but we're forced to spend hours and thousands of dollars on more compliance. So can you both talk about how blockchain technology, and I know that the front end of that slide deck was talking about this very point, on how social equity applicants and attendees today can save money, save hours, save time, right, by using blockchain technology. So we think that this is doing more, but it's actually making the business more efficient and more compliant. So can you all speak to that concern?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So some of the efficiency improvements that you're going to see in your business are going to happen from technologies that may not necessarily need to actually use blockchain. So, if you talk about things like, counting inventory, reporting your compliance data, accepting incoming products, all that kind of stuff, the way that we deal with it is just to make it really simple, work in with the business's processes, and then we do all the heavy lifting on the back end, with our databases and blockchain and all the rest of it. I think if you were talking about specific business improvements that are going to happen because of blockchain, that to me is going to be allowing businesses to combine themselves into networks to cooperate effectively before we have an industry-wide blockchain, and to be able to do that in a way where if they're nervous about it, they can pull out and nothing lost. So by allowing businesses to be able to work together, we'll be able to create a decentralized network of cannabis businesses that are able to achieve things that for all of them and stop people, coming in over the top and buying everybody out, for example.
Yeah, I think another kind of good example of how blockchain can maybe help reduce costs is in the event of a recall. So if you think about it, you can, most of my work revolves around the electric vehicle market. So I've been seeing all these recalls of EVBs, right? And, you see these headlines, Honda pays, $1 billion for this recall. And that's not to say there's definitely recalls in cannabis. That's why this parallel is relevant. And the whole value prop with blockchain is, instead of recalling, every single product that you think is affected by the recall, or what the defect that has, triggered the recall, you can actually have data that evidences batches or individual products that might be the only ones affected by that recall. So instead of recalling 1 million products, you're only recalling 10,000 from, one part of the supply chain that went awry. So I think it's going to be in the future, hopefully something that you can't afford not to do. Right now, it's a little bit of like that early adopter. There's few players, and the benefit might not be there. But I think in the future, when everyone is transacting on a blockchain, you definitely can't afford to be the one that's not on the blockchain, because you're just missing out. You're leaving data on the table. I mean, we always talk about leaving money on the table, but I think leaving data on the table is a big is going to be something that's going to happen in the next couple of years, and people are going to realize it.
I know for our attendees today, they may be worried about costs, because you're talking about the cost of the tags, right, in that slide deck, and we're talking about these blocks and all this information, and it takes all this energy to produce these chain of blocks, and you have to have all these servers. So that, to me, when I hear all that, I'm hearing dollar signs, right? I'm also at the same time hearing you, Matt, when you're talking about being able to add that RFID.
RFID,
right?
yeah.
RFID, that tag, right? When you're able to add that tag, that you might be able to increase the amount that you're charging a consumer. But can you talk to us a little bit about the actual cost, both of you talking about the cost of the technology to adopt, but then also how that cost can be offset to the end user or the end consumer?
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of interesting kind of ideas around the costs, and I think that we definitely heard a lot of it. What we initially proposed was cost prohibited, which was, I won't even go into it, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to honestly, we're trying to take this iterative approach to full decentralization and distribution. where we might exist as a more, centralized product right now to get you on board. But that means essentially you can share nodes, you can pay less money to participate because you can share that infrastructure. And our strategy over time is to take those customers, those users, and start to take them down a path of decentralization. Because again, that's not what really people are interested in right now. They're interested in the value props of what a blockchain can bring, which can be accomplished through slightly fewer degrees of total distribution or decentralization. So we try to operate on some kind of service model that would be very similar to what you would pay for a Salesforce or any other kind of critical SaaS service. I think the tags are a whole other issue. When you talk about them. This thing right here costs about 20 cents. If I go to a cannabis producer and I say, oh yeah, you want to put these tags, give them all the value props, give them the elevator speech, they'll again say, how much does it cost? 20 cents. They'll be like, talk to me when it's 1 or 2 cents, because that's the price points they argue over. They're not arguing over, dollars, they're arguing over pennies when it comes to individual packages of cannabis product. So, I think the margins, are pretty slim, but I think as this idea of value increases and traceability, you can learn about, the business and the consumer facing kind of value that you can derive from this kind of technology.
As you were speaking, I was just thinking about maybe cost sharing, right? So that tag is going to benefit everyone from seed to sale, right? So how can we, and maybe this is just more of a comment than a question, but incorporate kind of cooperative practices. So a few social equity applicants, if you have one that or license holders, one that is a cultivator, one that does distribution, one that makes so a few that make products, and a few that own retail locations, maybe they could kind of cost share to drive down the cost of that tag, because it would benefit everyone in the system. So that's more of a comment, but Dr. Isaac,
You're getting
to bring you it.
Yeah. So, and I mean, look, in terms of cost, it's one of those things where, again, it depends on the specifics of the implementation. I mean, we've got solutions that are down to that, half to 1 cent per smart tag type technologies. And then we've also got other solutions where, we're getting up to $1 to $2 per item because we've got all the bells and whistles on it. But, ultimately, at the end of the day, what most people need is just that standard smart tag technology. And what we found is that the price that we offered it at, including, the monthly subscription for data and all that stuff, it was cheaper than buying the labels that they were using to print for the point of sales tracking tag. So that already was like, right, if we can just come in and be cheaper than that, it's already a win for the business. And so I think that businesses, the business risk of not being on top of the best that technology can offer means that you're very likely to be outcompeted by a local business. There's not only one marijuana business in town. And so people need to be cognizant that you're comparing and contrasting, from retailer to delivery service, from this city to that city. And, like in any free market, you need a competitive edge to stay in business. So one of the things that we've always been really focused on, any bit of technology that we would deliver to a business has to generate for them an ROI. Otherwise, we've been wasting our time.
And we did get a question, and I know you all presented the slide deck earlier to talk a little bit more about the tags, but for those who may have missed that initial half of the conversation, can you please go into this further and explain how the tags work, what that is, and just give us maybe like a 20-second briefer for those who may have missed that first part of our conversation this evening.
Yep. All right, cool. So very quickly, to be able to connect the digital world that lives in the cloud, including the blockchain, with the real physical world, we need some sort of connection point. That connection point and parcel, we call it a smart tag, other people call it a tag, or whatever it is. There's a number of different technologies that could be used in that tag. We can talk about things like a barcode, a QR code, an NFC tag, which is an RFID tag, a UWB RTLS tag. there's all sorts of different options. You can collect data off them, including, sensor information, pressure, heat, whatever it is that you want to capture. And that's what we use to make the connection between the digital world and the real world. And
Thank
Matt
you.
just showed you one
Yeah, so
over
this
there.
is
Yeah.
I've been using these NFCs at a trade show. It's just a perfect thing to have around a hotel room. But yeah, this is a near field communication. Again, tap to scan technology can return, data, and it just returns, a string of data, and you can customize that to be a URL. You can customize it to be just a serialized UID that points to a URL. But yeah, they come on a roll. Like, this is just one out of thousands that we have. And you buy, you purchase the whole roll and you affix it to your products. There's an encoding process. Yep, exactly. There's an encoding process which can be done with machinery from the tag provider. But this one, I can encode myself and kind of create demos on the fly. Like what I showed you with that scan was something I had put together 2 minutes before this call. So there's varying degrees of the technology. This one also has rolling code, which basically means that even if there was a URL on this, you would have to scan the actual tag to access that serialized information. You can't just send it to a friend, because the code would roll over and the system would look for another access point through the tag itself. And basically, the more you pay for it, the cooler stuff you can do with it. But yeah, you can be very basic, and let's not also forget about the basic QR code, which is great for serializing objects. There's nothing essentially wrong with it. And that's
one other thing. One other thing I'll just say quickly: the bit here on the back is the NFC tag itself. What people should keep in mind is that what they're going to see is something that looks more like this, where there's a tag behind the sticker. R1, you can see it's there. It's just got like a little image and a serial code so you can visually identify it. Point is, a lot of the time you're not going to actually see NFC, which is why a lot of the times it's a great option, because, if you've got, some lovely packaging that you spend a lot of money, to get designed up and everything, it's much nicer to have the technology be able to sit under the label than to have to glaringly be something that sits over the top of it.
Thank you both for that. And again, this is another question/comment, but I'm thinking, when you go to a restaurant, you see very clearly the grade of the restaurant. You see A, B, C, etc. But when you go to a cannabis retailer, we don't necessarily have a system that's similar. So I'm wondering how might blockchain and the kind of smart tag or a different version of that same tag be useful in the context of the retailer? So to be able to show maybe the labs that it works with, that I'm just kind of thinking out loud and kind of asking, like, what are the other applications of this tag technology apart from putting it on products from seed to sale?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great kind of question comment. I think, what was not really like explicitly mentioned, at least with the way that I was thinking about, this in terms of that end consumer product, that story, you would likely, I think the realistic buyers of that story, or, buyers as in the producers, the brands, they would be more of those high-end, high-quality brands. Because the thing with the blockchain is we're exposing your data to end consumers. If you have dodgy practices or you grow, swaggy weed, that is going to be evidence on the blockchain and available to the end consumer. So why would you want to share that? And I think another question that you had in our little roll of questions before this meeting was, what would you kind of inform producers right now in terms of, thinking about blockchain? And I would honestly just say, just keep working on your products and keep making really good products, because those are going to tell a compelling story. And it's easy to fit, good data onto the blockchain. It's hard when you're trying to kind of be shifty and think about things that you have to hide and things that you have to privatize. If you can be transparent because your products are good, you're going to be in good shape when this rolls around, I believe.
That's a great point.
One of the things that we come and tell businesses before they start using our technology is, if you guys have been selling product out the back door that's unlicensed, good on you, well done. But please, God, don't do it when our technology is working in your business, because we're not going to stop. Our principle is we don't stop anyone cheating, but we're going to catch everybody that does. And again, you know, one of the things that it's like we thought about here is the way that we do a lot of this is even we can't adjust the data. You know, it's outside our control, which is an important element in people being able to trust it. You know, it is what was entered in there, and then, you know, you live or die by your data. And because of that, that should engender a really strong feeling of trust to anyone that has to look at that data. And then, you know, this is another thing where, you know, if I go back to what I was saying before, to me, this industry is about patience. Now, I had a bloke that I was working with out of San Francisco, and he was telling me he sources cannabis for his niece, and she had a form of epilepsy. I don't remember exactly. And for him, it was actually really important what the lab results were. But, you know, he would talk to the dispensary, he'd talk to the brand, and he found it really, really difficult. Then when he finally got the information, he went and checked, got the cannabis tested himself, turned out it was a complete lie. And so, you know, that's why when we've got, you know, our end user smartphone application and people scan one of our products, you can download those lab results. Because at the end of the day, anything and everything that we can do to make it better for patients, it's on us to do it. And if we keep that focus, the industry will progress the way that it needs to, and it won't be able to get diverted and you know, shunned to the side like has happened for so long. And you know, that also brings me to the point where in cannabis, we know that you've got to be able to match a strain to a condition to a person. Okay, let's say that we could do that. I mean, we can't really do it yet, but this is one of those applications blockchain will help us be able to do. Let's say you could say exactly what level of the 450 plus cannabinoids and other chemicals that could be in the plant, what they should be. Where are you going to get it? Like, good luck. And forget about it if you're a patient in California going to Massachusetts. So what we're really also trying to put into place is to think about, well, if I'm a person with a condition in a particular place, where can I source the cannabis that is most likely to help me with my condition? You know, people, this question's gone by the wayside, and it's not good enough. You know, it's like the industry needs to help those in need first, and then all the other good things will flow out of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think at least with my friend group, we have like our little mantra when it comes to the lab results is don't trust the numbers. You know, don't look at those and think it's going to be better or worse than what you're paying for, because it's not really anything that's informative. They're often skewed. There's often people who bribe laboratories to get, you know, desirable numbers, and there's just layers of fraud that just don't need to be there. So, you know, yeah.
I'd even just add to that quickly and say there's layers of uncertainty that nobody thinks about. They see the number 22% THC. Well, if that's plus or minus 10%, well, we've got a bit of a problem here, right? But so it's that uncertainty in sampling of cannabis flower, like no one ever talks about it, so consumers can be.
Yeah, right. As I learned, the process is basically you take like 1 gram, a 1 gram nug. You often would take the best, you know, nug you can get to offer as that sample, but then you're attesting that sample to 10 pounds of the same kind of cannabis, because it really isn't. There's variation within a plant itself, but, you know, like if it grows on the bottom or the top. So it's just not accounted for. And there's just so much nuance that I want to be captured through this kind of system.
So that's why one of the things that we felt was important is not just to make the lab results available for an end user, but to let the end user know, it's like, did it get retested? How many samples were taken, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because these things are really important. People, you know, cannabis consumers are actually really savvy. They want a lot of this data and they're hungry for it. They just don't have a way to get it. And that's why it's incumbent on us as technology providers to be able to make it available in a way that we don't give extra work to the business. They've got enough rubbish they've got to worry about. And it doesn't cost consumers more. it just gives them more freedom of choice.
Thank you. So it sounds like blockchain technology can help consumers use data to make better informed decisions. That's fantastic. And I also just want to raise some of the comments out of the chat talking about the raising the standard of transparency using blockchain technology, and then also accounting for inconsistencies. I do want to shift a little bit back. We've been having so much engagement with our audience, but I do want to shift back to one of the questions that I had earlier, and that is how can blockchain technology support sustainability? And when we talk about sustainability, I'm talking about environmental sustainability in the cannabis space. And I want to kind of dovetail that question that I have with this comment from one of our audience members who is also concerned about, and I'm actually looking for the comment now, but is also looking for sustainability, and then talking about recycling and, you know, maintaining accountability in those sorts of practices. So can you both talk about the role of it, because we know that there can be waste in the cannabis space, but also there's some concerns around sustainability, environmental sustainability in blockchain. So can you both speak a bit about that? And I'll start with Dr.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dr. Delara. And look, this is one of those things that, again, you know, it's really close to our heart because, you know, as much as we're big supporters of the cannabis industry, the amount of packaging involved in that industry is obscene. There's no other way to talk about it. And the problem that we have is you can't recycle used cannabis packaging in the same way that you would recycle other products because there's cannabis residue on it. Therefore, it falls in a different regulatory bucket. Therefore, all this cannabis package ends up in the landfill. And, you know, this green industry is not so green. So one of the things that we've actually developed at Parcel is a program that extends the tracking technology that we have to be able to track the return of used cannabis packaging to a particular collection center. And we thought about that if we don't provide any incentivization structure to people, then we're not going to get the uptake that we'd really like to have there. And so when it comes to an end user perspective, we can incentivize them with loyalty points or things of the like. And when it comes to, let's say, a dispensary or someone else that wants to be a collection center, the increase in foot traffic that can drive a bigger ROI because more people are coming through your doors is where they're able to take advantage of that and do it in not just in a way that is economically sustainable as well as sustainable for the planet itself. So I might actually, if it's all right with you, Dr. Delara, we've got a page that we've set up for retail locations that are interested to let us know, because it's something we're rolling out in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and kind of I can echo all of that sentiment because, you know, we put sustainability very high up on our priority in terms of what we want to offer to the market. And we're just now releasing a greenhouse gas MVP, a greenhouse gas accounting MVP, which essentially can track object level greenhouse gas. So when you buy that gram of cannabis at the store, you would know kind of the partition of, you know, the greenhouse gases that accumulated over that life cycle, over that processing, over that shipping of that cannabis. And you can get it down to understand, you know, how many kilograms of CO2 your purchase has essentially created demand for. And as a consumer, you can then choose to offset that. And we even, you know, enable tools to offset and then track offsets on the blockchain. I think the end of life kind of question, I saw it pop up early. I was so happy because, again, we do like our whole focus with EVBs, electric vehicle batteries, started with that area, started with the idea that this is going to become a problem. This waste is going to amount to something huge if it's not dealt with, if it's not channeled correctly. So we want to be able to first identify, you know, where that waste is, and then you can work towards building, you know, that circular economy. Because what we want is that, you know, glass from a jar of dabs to go back into a producer who's making, you know, those dabs, even maybe from a reuse standpoint before recycling, because you want to be as, you know, sustainable, and you want to, you know, kind of make sure you're keeping that circular economy if it's possible, or trying to establish it.
Thank you both. Sustainability is critical. Sustainability, both of the business, but also the environment. So we do thank you for discussing how blockchain technology can support environmental sustainability. I want to move and, as we talk about the war on drugs and the war on people who use drugs, I want to ask, so I want to nerd out in getting the explanation and the definition of this word, but also in answering this question. So what is the role of decentralized autonomous organizations in supporting redressing the harms created by the war on drugs and the war on people who use drugs? And obviously implicit in that question is, what is a DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization? And can you give an explanation? So I'll start with Dr. Isaac.
Thanks, Dr. Delara. So, look, I think it's one of those things that, has also drawn a lot of people to the cannabis industry, which is that for so long, as I shared in the story earlier, people that are trying to source cannabis for whatever reason have had to endure suffering that they should never have had to endure. And I think, broadly speaking, most people would agree with that. Even above and beyond it, I think all of us recognize that cannabis criminalization has been used as a tool for oppression and discrimination, which are obviously things that we want to be able to move away from as fast as humanly possible. But one of the things that we wanted to recognize in Parcel is that people's individualized suffering that they had to endure should firstly be recognized, but not only be recognized, but also be compensated for. And, it needs to be done in a way that is, measured and sustainable. And so that's why we've actually gone ahead and created a decentralized autonomous organization that is set up as a charity to compensate people for the suffering they endured as a result of cannabis prohibition. So there's a long period of public consultation in there because we need to draw on that collective wisdom of all the people who know much more about various elements of this than any of us, and to take their opinions on board and integrate it into an algorithm that can go ahead and do it. So this is a thing we've created called the Ithaca Foundation. It's just an acronym that stands for the Internet of All Things About Cannabis. And we've got an algorithm that we've drafted, and we're going to be exposing that in the next little bit. And we're really excited about the chance to be able to finally turn around some of the suffering and inequity that people had to endure, and give them a chance to be able to feel satisfied enough to be able to move past it to a world that we've created where everyone's just treating each other fairly.
Thank you so much for that. And Matt?
Yeah, I totally agree. And just for some extra kind of clarity, what a DAO is essentially just, it's like a board for a company, right? It's like the decision makers of a company who get to vote on proposals and get to vote on the direction of the company, but it's distributed based on a variety of different ways. So you can have, let's say, a token that's just established where people who stake their token, which means just kind of lock it away, they have a certain amount of rights and voting, votes essentially to change the direction of that DAO. The more tokens you necessarily stake, the more of pull you have, but then you're kind of, dealing with everyone else in that ecosystem. So it's never going to be that one dominating voice. It's often going to be this idea of consensus that emerges from a consortium. And I totally agree. I think that question was really interesting because I was thinking, at the most severe level, we just have a revolution and overthrow all local, state, and national governments, institute DAOs, and then we're living in this perfect utopia of Decentraland, and it's awesome. But I don't think that's what the answer you're looking for. I think, what I would totally agree with that sentiment around the charity. You can have a charity and the decision making of where those funds go to help people who have been negatively affected by this war on drugs. That decision making can occur through a DAO, and you can have even people who have been affected. They can have certain special kind of statuses within the protocol that you established to build that DAO, so that their sentiment and their ideas are maybe kind of established within something like a smart contract. So yeah, I think that is where it would go right now, but it can definitely evolve. Like DAOs can be consortiums that make standards and decisions around the whole industry in the future to ensure that these things don't happen again.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you both. Oh, Dr. Isaac, go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly, it's just one of those things where a DAO really lives up to that promise in the US Constitution of by the people, for the people.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And we want to use this technology to make our government better, right? And so I'm wondering, we have 5 minutes left in this session, a ton more questions, but I'm gonna ask 2 questions, and I'm gonna ask each of you just to answer one of the questions. So we'll squeeze out two questions and one answer from each of you. One, I'm just gonna paraphrase a question here. So how hard would it be to create a testing system that is acceptable by regulators? In theory, if we had the technology to get much more accurate results. So let's say we can leverage blockchain technology, as you all are saying, using metric to get more accurate results. How can we get this through the proper hoops and ladders within our government to make sure that not only the machines are safe, but that you have buy-in on the compliance side from regulators?
I can take that. And I just think, I don't have the answer, but I think it would be interesting if you could encode the machine itself as part of a smart contract, and maybe pair a government agency that's looking for certain audit data to come from the machine directly. The smart contract would run every time the machine would run to return that data in the standardized way that the regulator is expecting it, so that at least the regulator, as this independent, stakeholder, can have this understanding of every single time a test was performed. I don't think that might not be realistic, but that's just a quick idea. I think smart contracts are the way to go when you're talking about these really high-tech, intense pieces of hardware.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Isaac, close us out. Let us know what hope you can offer to our social equity cannabis licensees and applicants. So how can blockchain technology help them not only survive, but thrive in this extremely competitive industry where you have multi-state operators? At one point, we're going to have federal legalization. So how can they thrive using this technology? Close us out.
So look, the good news is that there's still so much space and growth in this industry that there's plenty of room for people that are just coming into it now or in the next little bit to be able to make their name and really make it in this space. Look, I think that cannabis, unlike many other traditional industries, is going to lay the groundwork for how future industries can be run, composed of small and medium to sized businesses, all being enabled through the power of blockchain to allow those businesses, as we said before, to cooperate as a decentralized network and operate with the same level of supply chain intelligence that a centralized entity like Amazon is able to operate with. At the end of the day, as big as someone like an Amazon is, there's more of us than there are them. And so if we cooperate and collaborate effectively, we will succeed in creating the industry that we actually want to see. And blockchain technology is going to help the thoughts and wishes of the people stay at the forefront of how that industry evolves.
Thank you both. And I do shamelessly want to say that I hope as much as you all are impressing upon our social equity applicants, that those social equity applicants and licensees are impressing on you, and that we can find collaborative ways to leverage this technology, especially for folks who may not have $1 million to start up and really maybe, just beginning. And so I do think there are some ways in which we can leverage this technology, and I hope we can have more conversations on how we can put social equity applicants and licensees at the center of this conversation on blockchain, because we really do not want them to be left behind this critical, innovative technology. All right, and we want to thank everyone for attending, and we want to thank our speakers for their time. We want to thank our tech team, and we want to thank, most importantly, the Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation for making this event possible. We encourage you to learn more about Canatech and join Brad Rowe at 7:30 for a webinar on testing lab technology integration. And again, we thank you for your questions and your attention. And to our panelists and speakers this evening, Matt and Dr. Isaac, if you have not already, and I know the chat is, folks joined in, they may not have seen it. So feel free to drop in your contact information, your website information, if folks want to be in touch with you directly.